I just want to warn you, this is going to be a little bit rough, but it's going to be a little bit more personal too. So maybe it'll be kind of a wash. Maybe it'll end up good. I have been wanting to present my notes from the Gospel of Thomas for a few weeks now. I found the book at a used bookstore for, I think, 75 cents. I was so geeked and devoured it immediately and wrote out all these notes. And I could tell right away that I wanted to do a presentation on it. And so I typed up my slides in PowerPoint, and I don't know if you've watched some of my other earlier videos, but whenever I've done a PowerPoint presentation where I can show you the text, which would be so useful for this, the audio is crap. Every time that I transitioned the slide or started the audio recording over, like if I paused it and started it over, it would have this huge volume at the onset of each little transition, and I don't know what to do about it. I don't have a better mic. I don't have a better software program. I've typed up slides and notes, and I really wanted to be able to show you guys the words so that you could be reading the words while I read them and talked about them. And that crappy audio with the PowerPoint is just so awful. I can't do anything with it. So I thought I would just try to talk about it and maybe just be very clear with my speech, hopefully, so that I can share some of these quotes. Maybe I'll shorten the presentation down and just do like the really, really good ones. So the Gospel of Thomas is basically just a list of sayings. It's not a story, so I don't think it's a problem if we jump around, because it's really like taking each little bit and then just looking deeper into that little bit. It's not really so much about the continuity of the sayings. So let me talk a little bit about why this even matters to me. Like, why would I be geeked to find a used copy of the Gospel of Thomas? Why would I read it right away and make notes and then want to do a presentation on it? Like, what would motivate me? So I have some notes on that. Let me read them. The real treasure of Jesus is not the story of his person. It's in seeking to understand the deeper, often obscure meanings of Jesus's words. His words were his true gift. His parables are invitations to seek, to do the labor, the private investigation of the riddle that grants one the wealth, the self-knowledge, and thus knowledge of the present kingdom of heaven. The church has taught many of us that heaven is somewhere else, that heaven is in the future, and that what it takes to get there is believing in a story about a savior. Why I am passionate about this. Abusive and toxic families are typically also very unconscious. And the keys to consciousness and self-awareness that Jesus provided, they have been largely destroyed or forced into hiding, and the little bits that got through have been hijacked and made impotent. I typed these notes when I was feeling a little spicy, so we'll see how this goes. The generational cycles of abuse within the childhood home are perpetuated by institutions that claim supreme authority, yet withhold the knowledge that enables the restoration of wholeness and restores love and safety to the family home. There is something amiss with how difficult it is for even the most well-intentioned folks to correct the core issues that keep abuse, trauma, and limited consciousness as the status quo. Perhaps that is why Jesus says, if you do not fast from the world, you will not find the kingdom. Because the less we interact with the common perspectives of this world, the more we come to see it in the light of the kingdom of heaven. Basically, adhering to cultural orthodoxy equates to spiritual blindness. Let's get to the Gospel of Thomas. I've talked for 5 minutes. Let's get to the thing. So, like I said, it's a list of sayings and not a story. It's not a narrative. And this is common for teachings that were passed down through oral tradition. And these sayings have a deeper meaning, just as the world does. These sayings are here to guide us to discover the secrets within the self as well as the world around us. The Gospel of Thomas lacks the themes of sin, judgment, and salvation the way that they are in the canonical texts. Here, the road to salvation is self-knowledge. Just like the oracle at Delphi inscription, know thyself. Here, the human problem is not defined as separation from God as a result of one's moral failings or the mythical failings of Adam, nor is the solution in faith in the death of Christ for sins, nor in resurrection. Knowledge of self and knowledge of the divine are inseparable. And when the disciples are misunderstanding what Jesus says, he directs their inquiries toward their own present situation. The present moment. People keep pointing to it. Jesus would invite them to discover the nuances of their own perceptions, the layers of meaning, the labels, the stories, the divisiveness, the cloud of illusions that distorted their ability to understand. He made them little breadcrumb trails in the form of parables, leading their consciousness to take steps of its own will and accord. And he guided their focus toward their own faulty interpretations of reality, and thus he showed them the reasons for their misguided questions. He wouldn't answer them outright. He would kind of point to something else. Self-discovery is the key to finding the potential wealth buried in people and around the world. So self-discovery is the theme of the Gospel of Thomas. It's a lot of Jesus's words about how to discover yourself, how to know thyself. Kind of major. There are a lot of patterns in the Gospel of Thomas, and I think it's important to look at the patterns, to look at like the common denominator, the common message, the common thread that's in kind of everything. Patterns do kind of lend a lot to that. There's an undercurrent of intent. There is a pattern of several recurring themes in Thomas, such as being focused on the present moment rather than in the past or the future. There's a theme of the disciples asking rather childish questions, as if they're still brainwashed, and their questions serve to represent the perceptions from which most people come. So a lot of people don't get it. So the examples of the disciples' questions are like the people that don't get it, like you'll see. They're like good supporting actors. They give Jesus the chance to clarify something or to point people in the direction of contemplation. There's also a massive theme of Jesus using parables as riddles that require participation in the honest intentions of the seeking mind. The individual must realize for himself the neural pathways have to fire on their own. He can't do it for them. So that's why the breadcrumb trail, that's why the parable. The brain, has to do its own little gymnastics to kind of activate whatever it is. The will to do this inner seeking is the invitation for the divine to dwell within. So if you are using your willpower to seek, then you are inviting the answers to your questions, the divine answers to your spiritual questions. Before we get to the sayings, just a few more patterns here. There's also a repeated theme of making the two into one, which is also referred to as marriage or the bridal suite. And this is really about the embodiment of the male and female. And often in other religions, this is symbolized with a hermaphrodite, but in Christian comprehension, it's characterized as offensive and vulgar. So when we see it, we are so detached from the symbolic interpretation that we just see it as vulgar, the Christian mind when I say we. The union of the divided aspects is repeatedly illustrated as the way to one's light. And it is through illuminating the outer world with this internal light that we come to recognize the kingdom of heaven all around us right now. There is also a repeated theme in Jesus' direction to contemplate the beginning. Over and over again, we hear this. To return to infancy, to return to the primordial condition of one's true self. The message of return to the state of divinity is an undercurrent of many holistic health pursuits today. It's a lot of techniques for healing often begin with the opting out of the toxic inputs of our world and kind of getting back to a place of purity. Lastly, there is a pattern of the message that one great thing is attained by putting aside lesser things. There were, several parables about like gathering a whole bunch of fish, finding one great fish amongst a bunch of, regular or smaller fish, and just keeping the one fish and throwing the rest away. So this was about going through daily, regular routine of a fisherman, having the discernment to recognize the one great thing amongst the ordinary, to keep that, to discard the rest, knowing that if it was not this one great thing, kind of meaning it was of God, it was of truth, something like that, that you don't need it. You actually need the removal of it. It's meaningless. So you keep the one great thing. So that's kind of the one example that I can give of one great thing is attained by putting aside lesser things. Jesus uses the word recognize quite often, and a lot of the time recognize means see what is there with understanding beyond the appearance. That's the best that I could kind of explain that one. Jesus said, recognize what is right in front of you, and that which is hidden from you will be revealed to you. Nothing hidden will fail to be displayed. Meaning that the kingdom is here in the present world. It is everywhere now, and one's quest should not lead one away from present circumstances. To have kingdom consciousness is to commit to the divine, to surrender conventional ways of being, acting, and living, and to give up conventional games of status and power. It is to risk divine madness because it's true sanity. A lot of the conventional ways that we see are like, well, at least in church, like prosperity consciousness or very rigid family-oriented rules. I'm not sure that that's embodying Jesus. Jesus lived in wandering poverty. He refused the false securities of dogmas and authorities. He refused the false securities of rules of conduct and purity, famously. To reach a state of authenticity, we must surrender to the birth of the kingdom within. This will cause a departure from worldly customs. This is an undercurring theme in the Gospel of Thomas. There appear to be three inner revelations. When we make the two into one, we reveal divine consciousness. When we integrate what we have denied, we achieve unity and we are whole. We see the impotence of dualistic concepts. Second, the heart center opens and all things are seen as an aspect of divinity. Third, there is a collapse of the previously useful categories of high and low, sacred and profane, through the revelation of presence in all things. And despair is the last illusion. So this is talking about like when you do kind of have a spiritual awakening, you can get to a point where everything just looks hopeless and you may get stuck being a nihilist for a while. But despair is the last illusion. The Gospel of Thomas lacks emphasis on judgment and on the coming end of the world. It values the present, and it says that the kingdom of heaven is here and now. The Gospel of Thomas urges self-knowledge. It urges contemplation of the nature of the world now. It urges reflection on the beginning of the world. Here, Jesus' teachings have a key injunction to seek and find. These are active verbs. The kingdom of heaven results from inner self-discovery. Paul, Mark, Matthew, and Luke all say to wait faithfully for an unearned grace to save us. Stevan Davies, who did the translation and annotations for the book that I picked up at the used bookstore, he writes about the authentic voice of Jesus basically being texts that were selected by the Christian orthodoxy, while other texts were systematically destroyed. The Christian orthodoxy was established not by the perspectives of Jesus, but by the victorious group of the first century who claimed the power to teach in his name. So what we get in our scriptures and our Bible are selected texts that were chosen by the orthodoxy, and they were not speaking for Jesus. They were not speaking from his perspective. They were not prioritizing teaching his message. Let's look at Gnosticism for a minute. In Gnosticism, the demonic archons are said to require souls for their own survival, and they develop false myths to keep people ignorant of the truth. The truth, though, is that humans originate from a God from the highest level of the universe, and once humans realize that this is the truth, they can ascend through the lower archon-riddled spheres to the highest world above. Jesus was here to inform people of their entrapment and of the events that led to their entrapment, and of a saving knowledge that would enable their escape. So Gnosticism, gnosis means knowledge, and Gnosticism is a religion that is focused on knowledge, which, goes hand in hand with know thyself. But where Gnosticism takes a sharp turn away from the Gospel of Thomas is the way that Gnosticism emphasizes a God sphere as being elsewhere, and Thomas, of course, emphasizes it as here and present. Saying 4 in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus said, "If your leaders say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds will be there first. If they say, 'The kingdom is in the sea,' then the fish will be there before you are. Rather, the kingdom is within you, and it is outside of you." Here, Jesus is telling them that their leaders are lying to them. He is also pointing out that they're being distracted. They're told to look everywhere else, look up, look down, look to the sea, everywhere except inside themselves is kind of the hint there. Saying 5. When you understand yourselves, you will be understood, and you will realize that you are sons of the living Father. If you do not know yourselves, then you exist in poverty, and you are that poverty. Here, Jesus is saying that when you know thyself, you will be understood, perhaps meaning less dissuaded from your truth, less influenced by the force of others. They stand under you in that way. You will be understood could also refer to a mutual knowing among people, kind of a recognition. Sons of the living Father, it to me is starting to sound like a genetic inheritance of a certain quality of consciousness. Maybe genetics not the right word there. But also here it's poverty symbolizes not a lack of money and clothes and gear, but a lack of knowledge and consciousness. A lack of self-awareness is an impoverished condition, and you feel it without recognizing it. Saying 7. Jesus said, oh, this is a confusing one, but we get it understood in the end. "Blessed is a lion that a man eats, because that lion will become human. Cursed is a man that a lion eats, because that lion will become human." It throws you off right off the bat because you think it's going to end differently, like it's supposed to be reversed at the end, but okay. It's a good example of an obscure meaning that you kind of have to dig and do some contemplating, and it's doing the mental shifting, like your will to pursue understanding this is how you're kind of rewiring yourself. So I'll read it one more time and then I'll explain what it means. Blessed is a lion that a man eats, because that lion will become human. Cursed is a man that a lion eats, because that lion will become human. Now, you may have noticed that in both cases, the lion becomes human. In the first case, there's a blessing upon the lion. In the second case, there is a curse on the man. The bless on the lion is when the man eats the lion. The curse on the man is when the lion eats the man. Okay, so when the man eats the lion, he is mastering his lower impulses, and his animal instincts are under the dominion of his human consciousness. The animal is blessed or made honorable in the human by way of the human being the master or the eater. But when the lower impulses are unchecked and it's the lion doing the eating, when the lion eats the man, it is the lion who thereby becomes the master, meaning that the lower impulses become the master. And so the human hands over the power of his consciousness to the lower self, the less conscious self, and thereby becomes cursed. Either way, the lion, the unintegrated self, manifests in the human, and it's a blessing if the lion is mastered, eaten, or integrated. But when the lion is doing the eating or the absorbing, the result is the cursed human. Okay. It does go into a lot about returning to the beginning, reorienting to the beginning as a means of discovering the original form and the original image of God. It talks about the two creation stories in Genesis. So it is important. I won't read all of what I have here. Our goal is to enter into the condition of the first creation. This is why he keeps referring to the beginning or to state of infancy, things like that. The condition of the first creation. Okay, this creation continues to exist in reality, although the second creation is the only reality most people perceive. So, like I'm talking about from Genesis, there are two stories of creation. The first creation still exists, but the second creation is the only reality most people perceive. The first hidden creation is the kingdom of heaven. So, all people are capable of finding it, but likewise, they're capable of losing it. This is why there are warning parables of thieves and bandits, not just for their contemporary relevance, but as a safe enough reference to the presence of forces that would covertly seek to take away one's spiritual stockhold. The world and worldly things can steal the kingdom from us. Saying 44. A city built and fortified atop a tall hill cannot be taken, nor can it be hidden. A city built and fortified atop a tall hill cannot be taken, nor can it be hidden. This is about strength in defense as well as openness. Don't try to protect yourself by hiding your light. If your city, your you is built and fortified atop a tall hill, atop your connection to divinity, you cannot be overcome by that, but you also cannot hide it. If you're going to let light shine within you, the light of God shine through you, the energy of God flow through you, you cannot hide that. You can be aware that attacks are likely because you are going to stand out, but there's no real danger in exposing your light. So there are sometimes misunderstandings about these gospels being secret or their meanings being secret, but these teachings are actually meant to be transmitted widely. They were called secret primarily because the meanings are obscure and they require some figuring out. So it's only a secret if you just refuse to try and think about it. If you just think that you don't have the time to do it and that it's not worth it, I guess then it's not for you. And that's fine. And let's just love everybody and pursue what we want to pursue on our own. Saying 49. His disciples asked him, "When will you appear to us? When will we see you?" Jesus replied, "When you strip naked without shame and trample your clothing underfoot, just as little children do, then you will look at the Son of the Living One without being afraid." Here, Jesus is talking about stripping off clothes, meaning stripping away our programming, our misleading indoctrinations, our arrogant sophistries, our garments of identity. When he says it will be shameless, it means that we have come to see through the veil of illusion, the false pretenses. We are liberated from shame and fear because we see that it was based on a false concept of reality. And thus we trample on those clothes. We completely devalue those old brainwashing programs. And now we are returned to our innocence just as little children who can look upon an honest man like Jesus and not be made uncomfortable by his freedom. Saying 51, Jesus said, "The Pharisees and the scribes have taken the keys to knowledge and have hidden them. They did not go in, and they did not permit those desiring to go in to enter." The Gospel of Thomas also talks about circumcision. I was going to speak about that for a moment. I will spare you guys. When asked if circumcision was useful or not, Jesus replied, "If it were useful, then they would be born already circumcised. On the other hand, true circumcision in the Spirit is entirely beneficial." This is a really terrible but perfect example of how we have gone medieval by taking things literally from the Bible. Circumcision means to cut around something, and symbolically it's about opening the heart to receive the Spirit of God. And I will leave it at that. Saying 68. Whoever has known the world has found a corpse. Whoever has found that corpse, the world is not worthy of him. Whoever has known the world has found a corpse. Whoever has found that corpse, the world is not worthy of him. This is about seeing the vampire that the world has become, seeing the dead corpse of the second creation as it has evolved. To know the world is to discover that it is a corpse, a body that has been previously animated. The second creation is linked to a corpse. It lacks an animating principle. The animating principle of the world, which is the kingdom within, remains undiscovered by most people. Realizing that the world is a corpse occurs simultaneously with discovering the kingdom that can animate it. To discover the kingdom of heaven, illuminate the world with light from within oneself. Don't hide it. Light within is self-knowledge. Don't hide it. Knowledge in general is no substitute for self-knowledge. Let's get that straight. That was an important point that my little used book made. Okay, moving on. Saying 80. One who knows everything else, but who does not know himself knows nothing. These are Jesus's words, people. Saying 82. Blessed are those who have been persecuted within themselves. They have really come to know the Father. Blessed are those who have been persecuted within themselves. They have really come to know the Father. This means self-knowledge famously entails honest self-appraisal, and this leads to suffering. The persecution within themselves that he's talking about, this is the discomfort that comes from an honest self-evaluation, the endurance of which is the path of self-knowledge and the integration of the divided internal aspects. So enduring that persecution is how you come to know the Father, how you come to get to the kingdom of heaven. You pursue self-knowledge and you stick with it no matter what you find. Saying 84. This is a good one. When you give rise to that which is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not give rise to it, what you do not have will destroy you. Once more. When you give rise to that which is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not give rise to it, what you do not have will destroy you. Give rise to what is within you. To me, this means bring awareness and recognition to what is within you. Bring it forth, bring it out of you, bring it into the light. If you do not give rise to what is within you, you do not have the gift that comes by bringing it into the light. And the absence of this gift, the absence of consciousness, will lead to your destruction. When we bring forth or give rise to what is within us, we are empowering our internal guidance system, our divine nature perhaps, and letting it lead us in co-creating with the environment from our authentic self. It is certainly a way to practice knowing thyself, and certainly a method of integrating the dormant or suppressed aspects of the inner being. Jesus often speaks of poverty when referring to a lack of self-knowledge, and of riches when referring to the attainment of self-knowledge. Supposedly, this knowledge is accessible to anyone who willfully and sincerely seeks for it. The act of seeking earnestly seems to recalibrate the mental capacities to receive these deeper understandings as we pursue our investigations. Why do some people have this inner directive to return to God and others simply do not? Perhaps it is a matter of constitution. There's the constitution of the primordial God, and there's that of Adam, of the second creation story in Genesis. A person's constitution is what they're made of. What are their inputs, their influences? What do they feed their body? What do they feed their senses? What do they feed their mind? As they say, shit in, shit out. Saying 103 in the Gospel of Thomas, they said to him, "Tell us who you are so that we can believe in you." He replied, "You analyze the appearance of the sky and the earth, but you don't recognize what is right in front of you, and you don't know the nature of the present time." Here, the questioners represent those who would focus their attention on the person of Jesus himself, my whole family, evidently assuming that what came to be known as faith in Christ is the proper essence of Christianity. They are seeking not to find the mystery of the kingdom, but the identity of Jesus himself. Jesus was not primarily teaching about himself, okay? When he is asked these questions about himself, he redirects attention to the condition of reality. Jesus says, "You analyze the appearance, but you don't recognize." You analyze. Lord, help us how much we analyze. You analyze the appearance, the shallow interpretation, but you do not recognize. He's saying that we're trying to find the kingdom by overcomplicating the surface comprehension, by analyzing the appearance, the sight, the shallow conception of it, and we do not recognize the kingdom because of this interference. Jesus dismissed the necessity of the ritual usage of prayer and fasting, saying that they were forms of repentance that should only be undertaken if the person became unmarried, if the one divided into two, if one loses the marriage of his aspects and loses sight of the kingdom. Then these practices have merit in their healing and restoration purposes. Internally, there needs to be a unity of wills for us to have inner peace and cooperation among our internal aspects. And this is likely a microcosmic truth that correlates with the greater need for a unity of wills in society, a sense of harmony and cooperation among all the various seemingly divided aspects. Unity is a major theme in Thomas, unity of the male and female, the marriage of the divided aspects within. With this inner wholeness, which we achieve through the pursuit of self-knowledge, we acquire the kingdom of heaven. We live in it through our being. The kingdom of heaven is already spread out on the earth. It's just that few people are able to discern it. In closing, wow, we made it. I resonated with the Gospel of Thomas as treasure and truth. It's simple, it's core, it's timeless. It just transcends all worldly compartmentalization. Self-knowledge as the path. This just resonates so much. Inner mastery first, internal mastery first. Mastery of the lower natures, the beast within, the less evolved or unintegrated aspects, mastery of the shadow, integrating of the shadow. Inner union of opposites, male and female aspects united, just bringing in that wounded inner child and, matching it with our highest, loftiest ideals. Just integrating all of it, inner aligned with outer. This sounds to me like peace. This sounds like emotional peace and sanity. This is a lack of distress and distortion. This is a lack of interference. This is being connected to truth. This is being connected to God. Sanity and emotional peace facilitate the contemplative portion of self-discovery. So yeah, if we can get to a place of sanity and emotional peace, we can access this kind of self-discovery and self-knowledge. Sanity and emotional peace also aid in the reconnection to and recognition of divinity. Sanity and emotional peace are, however, assaulted by many of our cultural norms. The world is a vampire, a corpse. Like the vampire, the world attacks us through its confusing duplicity, through the repeated traumatic shock of unmet, unrealistic expectations, through the abandonment of their non-reflection, the abandonment that is their utter lack of mercy. As the vampire's prey, we are tortured, exhausted, and drained of life. Weakened and fearful, we resign to a life of subjugation to the overpowering vampire. This is an illusion that becomes real enough and keeps us captive. So, why this matters to me, again, there's trauma in the home of nearly every child. Much of it is still hidden in plain sight. There are things we've yet to officially disgrace, and without asking from whence it came. This is generationally perpetuated human damage, and it is inhibiting the human being's ability to develop itself. This restrictive version of reality is taught to us. It is ignored as though it doesn't exist as an unnatural, unnecessary condition. We're taught to operate as though the home life had no particular relevance to our health and our mental well-being, to our potential in life. We're just now scratching the surface of how that's all related. The keys to building better human beings, and thus to building a society of structures in harmony with natural life, exist in these apocryphal texts. We are called to return to an original way of being, to return to our infancy, our nakedness, our shamelessness, our oneness and wholeness, who we are underneath our worldly garments. Are we really prepared to strip naked and trample our clothing? So much that is precious to us, our relationships, our income sources, depend on us keeping on our clothes and staying in the game or staying in our role. I suppose that only those who are truly sick of their costume are ready to take on the absurd quest of self-knowledge and the return to primordial consciousness and oneness with the divine. But what if it only appears absurd from the outside? It's just something to think about. Thank you for watching.